Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donnica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donnica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hi, and welcome to the ladies' room. Today's episode is going to be super fun. When I first decided to do this podcast, I immediately jotted down a list of fabulous women who I wanted to have as my early guests. And guess whose name was amongst the first on that list? Our next guest, Betsy Brint, who is one of the funniest, wittiest, wonderful women I know. And I know you'll feel like you know her just as well after we've been talking for only a few minutes. Now, for our regular listeners, it will come as no surprise to you that Betsy's sister is Sally Higginson, who is our guest from episode 9. I feel like a reality TV show host when I say that. And in episode 9, but as you may remember, Sally spoke passionately and very humorously about losing your virginity after divorce. If you haven't listened to it yet, make that one then next on your list. Betsy and her sister Sally co-hosted a nationally syndicated radio show together from 2004 to 2011 called Walking on Air with Betsy and Sal. And they were a powerhouse and hysterically funny team. Actually, they still are. It's just now off the air most of the time. I had the pleasure of being a frequent guest on their show in a segment called Weekly Checkup with Dr. Donnica. So now it's payback time, Betsy.
I'm excited.
It didn't take much convincing. She's game for just about anything. As soon as I told her the concept, she blurted out that she had breast reduction surgery when she was 16 and suggested that that would be a great topic. And of course, I agree. So we're going to start by talking about her story, but we're going to use that as a launching pad to discuss a wide range of issues related to teens and parents and cosmetic and elective reconstructive surgery. How you have the conversation, how you make the decision, how you find a surgeon, what the risks and possible benefits are. You may be surprised to find out that the most common plastic surgeries in teens are rhinoplasty, which is the big fancy medical word for a nose job, breast augmentation in females, and breast reduction in males. Ear surgery, and that's pinning back floppy ears, and dermabrasion, which I never even thought about for teenagers, but it's fairly common in teenagers who have scars from acne and other skin conditions. And all of this data that we're going to be talking about is from the American Society of Plastic Surgeons and their statistics. Now, shockingly, at least to me, according to their statistics, nearly 64,000 cosmetic surgeries were performed on teens in 2014. And that's when we're talking about teens, we're talking ages 13 to 19. But in addition, 161,000 cosmetically minimally invasive procedures were performed on teens. So minimally invasive is something where you don't have to go under anesthesia, in and out. Usually we're talking about things like dermabrasion, fillers, etc. There's been speculation that that number would continue to rise, but it seems to actually have leveled off. Now, more about Betsy. Betsy has a terrifically diverse background. She's a graduate of the School of Hotel Administration at Cornell University, and she started out her career working in the hospitality industry as a sales manager for Hyatt Hotels and as a purchasing director for TCA, a national health and fitness club. After marrying her husband David in 1990, she birthed and then they raised 3 fabulous children, all of whom I have had the pleasure of getting to know. After discovering that her youngest was blind at 8 weeks old, Betsy and David founded the Foundation for Retinal Research in 1993, and both have been ardent advocates for the visually impaired ever since. Betsy is also an avid proponent for teen sex education and women's health. She has volunteered as an itinerant health educator in schools and at a teen sexual health clinic. She is a trained birth doula, but says she hopes to use that skill only as an excuse to witness the births of her future grandchildren. Most of her time is now spent as an executive board member of the Highland Park Community Foundation in Chicago, as well as on her new venture as a licensed real estate agent in Park City, Utah. Remember that part I said about very diverse? Now, while her 2-legged children have moved out, Betsy is also a very proud mom to 2 golden doodles. With that, please help me welcome Betsy Brint. You are in the ladies' room.
All
Welcome.
Right. Yay.
Yay.
I spend a lot of time in the ladies' room.
We all do. And I think we all have stories of fabulous, memorable, interesting, weird, or bizarre experiences we've had in the ladies' room. But as you know, the whole reason that I started this concept of this podcast was to talk about things the way we would talk about in the ladies' room. And, I'm sure we've all had fabulous conversations. I also love to recall how many times I've been in the ladies' room and whichever gentleman I was with would exclaim afterwards in some degree of humor and dismay, what do you talk about in there all the time? And these are the kinds of things that we talk about.
It's a great concept, Donnica. I love it.
Thank you. I'm so glad. So I do want to jump into this topic of teen cosmetic surgery, but now you've got me wondering, and you were teasing me all day with this interesting photograph that you sent me. What is your most interesting, memorable, bizarre, or just flat out wacky experience you ever had in public ladies' room?
Well, it's so funny. It actually has nothing to do with our topic for today, but it was in LaGuardia Airport.
In New York?
In New York, yes, the lovely LaGuardia Airport. And I just was exiting the airplane and making the mad dash to I believe it's a 3-stall bathroom at LaGuardia for all of the millions of people, women getting off the plane in line. And I hear, as I'm waiting in line, this woman, shoving coins under the thing saying, could someone please just get me a tampon? Please, somebody, can you just, here's quarters. And so I say, I'm happy to do it. And I, grab the quarters and I look around and there are no machines. There's no place to get a tampon, and I'm well past that. So I have to see where I wrote it down. There was a sign in the ladies' room. And I am going to tweet it and I'm going to put it on Instagram. You have to. It's along classic. With your fabulous picture. Oh, thank you. Yes. And the sign at LaGuardia Airport's bathroom, ladies' room say, feminine care products may be purchased at Hudson News stores located within the main terminal and all concourses. I had to read that to this woman and to everybody in line who gasped. Every single woman there said, what? What are you supposed to do? And at that moment, about 13 women heading all the way out the door into the, to the terminal, opened their bags and started, throwing tampons at this woman, which I thought was just wonderful. It showed the community. But why do they put them out in the terminal? What are you supposed to do when you are stranded? You run out with your pants down between your legs. Ice and lots of toilet paper. Anyway. Well, I just saw a fabulous press release and article written about how Bhopal, India, just installed machines for tampons and sanitary napkins in their largest train station. And this apparently was a great, huge, exciting new development. For the first time? For the first time. Now, I was in a situation once in a ladies' room at my alma mater, Princeton University. Yes. And this was a few years ago, and I found myself in a situation where I needed some feminine protection. And they actually did have a machine in there, but as is very often the case, it was completely empty. So I did the same thing, offering people quarters, and the next woman online, was prepared and said, keep your quarters and, here. And that's— Pay it forward, ladies. Pay it forward. I think it's kind of the female version of smokers kind of bumming cigarettes from each other. Right. Saying, okay, you're paying it forward. You're donating this tampon so that the next time you are in need, you can do it. But somebody also sent me, and I love people who are sending me now photographs of their favorite signs or situations in ladies' room. And please only send me the photographs that are appropriate. Right. Actually, in my gym, I just saw a notice that I've seen in a lot of gym locker rooms, and I never really understood it. These big signs that say no cell phone use. And I'm so naive. It hadn't occurred to me that the reason they don't want anybody to use cell phones is because you could be surreptitiously videoing somebody or taking their photograph, which of course never occurred to me. But I, of course, took a picture of the sign when nobody was looking. But somebody else sent me a sign from a ladies' room that said, flushing tampons is punishable by death. As it should be.
And I feel sorry for these places who are like restaurant owners and other proprietors of businesses that have situations where toilets are getting way overclogged. However, you should put a little trash can or a dispenser in there so we can dispose of these products properly and not in the toilets.
Well, I will say, and I guess I shouldn't out my children, but I'm going to, because I do teach safe sex in the school. We did have a plumber have to come to our home. And speaking of flushing things that really shouldn't be flushed, the plumber unclogged the toilet, and I innocently went up and said, so was it a tampon? What got clogged up there? And he goes, do you really want to know? I said, yes, I do. And he said, let's just say there's some safe sex being practiced around here.
Oh my gosh. Because initially when you started this story, I'm thinking, okay, your two sons aren't responsible then for what was, wow. Okay. So
they all did the finger pointing at each,
So yeah. So our public service announcement then is don't flush tampons down the toilet and don't flush down other forms of protection down the toilet as well. Correct. That is a great story. Okay, so now let's get on to our main topic. And you and I staying on any main topic for more than 5 minutes is a challenge. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna try.
Okay.
So you immediately came up with this topic about having had a breast reduction surgery when you were 16, which of course, having known you for 20 years, I didn't know that. Actually, more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. How did that come about, and how did you make it happen?
So it began in, I guess, in a way that is probably the wrong way to come to realize that you don't really like the way your body looks. And that was through bullying.
Right. When I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it was bullying. So I was in middle school, which is when bullying usually takes place. And in 7th grade, developed earlier than most and more than most at that age. And I had just broken up with my first, real boyfriend, and he didn't like the fact that I broke up with him. Mm-hmm. So he began to tease me, and it caught on, and all the boys in school, decided to.
You could say his name if you want.
Oh, Danny, you are going to get it. I will never forget. So he initially started this whole group of boys, and I would walk into the classroom, and they would all, start to make these mooing noises like a cow because of the big udders. And it was just horrible. And back then, schools really weren't supportive of kids who were being bullied. And I would go home every day and I would bawl my eyes out, and my mom would, and my dad would, sit there and try and make things better and go to the counselor and do everything. And they never pulled the boys in. They never did anything, and didn't really end until my big brother, who was much older and 6'4", grabbed Danny after school and said, if you do this again to my sister, I'm going to get my big brother to get you. That put an end to it.
Yeah, but that's how we handled things in my neighborhood.
That's right. But the truth is, it stuck with me. And I had developed, posture to hide my breasts. I would hunch over. I would wear big clothes. I gained weight, all the things to try and hide the fact that I was a normal developing, young woman. And my older sister, Sally, also, this is genetic. You have big boobs or you don't. So we both were kind of going through the same thing, teasing, whatever. She decided, because she was older and more aware of, ways to take action, that she was going to look into having a breast reduction. And so by the time she got to high school, she started talking to my parents about it and going through the motions, made the appointment with the surgeon, set a date to do it. And people in my family, there were some people who weren't supportive back then. It wasn't very popular back then. Plastic surgery was kind of not talked about, sometimes frowned upon. And she changed her mind, which was fine. Mm-hmm. I, however, said, well, I'll
take your appointment.
I'll take your appointment. I'm in. I'm doing it. And so decided to go ahead. As soon as she heard that, being the lovely, competitive older sister, she said, I want the appointment 2 weeks before.
It's too bad for your mother that you didn't both just do it at the same time, and then she could have had you both convalescing.
Well, of course, we always said 4 for the price of 3. But so she got in 2 weeks before. And then only the way Sal can do, as you know, as soon as she was done and kind of on the road to recovery and it was my turn, she turned to me and she said, "Oh my God, did it hurt? It was horrible. It was this," which, it really
And that wasn't your experience.
No, it really, really, truly didn't. She was just an
so
older sister.
You were 16 when you had it, and she was how old?
18.
Okay. And how did you approach the subject with your mother? You just said, "I want what she's having"?
Exactly. Pretty much the way younger sisters do. But Sally had broken the ice, and it wasn't so, it was easier on my mother because she had grown up, also with larger breasts and seeing her mother the same way. More difficult for my dad, being a man of a certain age and thinking, why would any woman want to do
smaller
that?
Breasts.
Right. We like these. This is not something you change. What man is going to want you if you do this?
Did he actually say that, or you're just projecting that?
Maybe it was said by somebody else in the family, but
It was said by Danny.
No, it was a crazy aunt. But anyway, it was, things like that were going, but he was very supportive. He did, question it, talk to the doctors, really interview them very carefully, but he actually ended up being supportive.
That's great.
Yeah, he was a good guy.
That was great.
Yeah.
So in addition to the bullying, which, is very common in girls at this age, and, middle school kids can be so cruel, but did it interfere in other aspects of your life? So were you athletic?
Yes. So I was athletic. I was actually a synchronized swimmer.
Ooh.
I know you were
I was a competitive swimmer.
You were a competitive swimmer. And I was a synchronized swimmer, which meant, you got to dive in and go do your thing. We had to do this whole little thing on the pool deck and, prance around in our swimsuits. And it was, it's a little tough to do that. And back aches, clothes. Everybody was wearing these cute clothes. Couldn't wear the clothes everybody else was wearing. It was a whole self-image. And whereas all the other girls were starting dating their boys, and your breasts were part of your sexual image and your pleasure point and, your identity, I wanted mine gone. I hated them, and it was sort of something that just wasn't part of what made me happy. And it was an interesting transformation. Once the surgery was over, it was like, the sun came out. It was really wonderful because it was sort of an impetus to lose weight and to be, wear what I wanted to wear, stand up tall, and just feel better about, I felt like this is what I was supposed to look like. I wasn't supposed to be out of proportion like this. This is who I was.
So I know everybody who's listening now is dying to know. So how big were you?
So it was, I think the sizing is different now than it was then. So it was double D back then, which I don't know what they call it. They have all these extra letters, but 5'5" and a double D, it was big for me.
And 16.
And 16.
So how old were you when you started to develop?
6th grade.
Okay. So one of the things I've heard from several other women who've been in this situation is that they felt like they were treated like they were promiscuous just because they had big breasts. In fact, one of my friends told me she went to a Catholic girls' school, and the nuns treated her like she was some kind of bad girl just because she had very large breasts.
That's interesting.
Did you ever have, obviously you didn't go to Catholic school, but did you ever have the experience where people treated you or presumed things about you?
No, but I was definitely looked at like I was much older than I was. And I think sexualized more because of having large breasts. I don't think they presumed it, but I'm not really sure.
So how did you decide at 16 what size to become?
So the doctor and I had a long discussion about it. And they look at your body frame. You can also look at photos. You can decide kind of, do you want to be, it depends also on the shape of your breast.
Mm-hmm.
And if your nipple is kind of high up or low down, is it more full underneath? Is it fuller up above? Where they take it from is mostly underneath, and they move the nipple up. Does it make sense? So I actually ended up a little fuller than many people who have breast reduction. So I'm now about I would say a B plus, C minus, B plus, somewhere in there. And again, it still fluctuates with weight. The other interesting thing, and this I didn't know, was they do the sort of the nipple test where, well, this was back then, and I'm not sure how.
What is the nipple test?
So the nipple test. So if you take your arm and you kind of let it, hang down, and you're naked, your nipple should be right in between your elbow and your shoulder. So right in there. Okay, that's where your nipple should be. And mine was at my elbow at 16. Kind of at the bottom of the breast. So it's just, that's the way large breasts are. They droop, they hang down. And so just to have it lifted up and be sort of in a place that was more comfortable for me.
We're all going to be doing this nipple test.
You've got to do the nipple test, right?
I never heard of the nipple test.
You got to do the nipple.
Know where my nipple falls in terms of my arm.
Right?
I've got to go assess that.
Well, it changes as you get older.
I'm sure.
Now I'm happy it's not at the knees.
Right. Gravity is not your friend. But that was what I was going to ask you is, so one of the things we talk to women about who want breast reduction surgeries and even breast enhancement surgeries is that if you have children, your breast size can change in the course of pregnancy and in the course of nursing. Now you had 3 children. How did your breasts change after all 3 pregnancies?
Yeah. So like any other woman who nurses, and that's actually, you brought up a really good point about nursing. So you have to kind of make a decision because they won't guarantee that you can nurse.
Okay.
At least this is what you're the doctor, so you can answer these questions.
I am not a plastic surgeon.
I know.
I can honestly say I have never done breast surgery on anyone.
It's interesting. And I actually have gone to the doctor with friends' children recently who are interested in breast reduction. You kind of become the expert when people find out about it.
And that's why you're here, because on this show, the real experts are the women who have been there, done that, and written the postcard. Right.
So what the doctors told me, and what they've told other people, and other doctors may have different opinions, are many times large-breasted women have a little bit of trouble nursing anyway, because their breasts get pulled and dragged and the milk ducts get stretched out, so it might be difficult. I also know that from my doula training, people who have difficult relationship with their breasts may not always want to nurse. So you have to kind of think about that before you have the breast reduction. What this one plastic surgeon recently told this young woman I was with was, if nursing is really important to you, wait to have the breast reduction. Don't do it until after you've had your children, because it could reduce your chances. However, the way that most doctors now do the surgery, they're not taking your nipple off. They're just moving it up. They're keeping everything connected. So you may, in fact, be able to breastfeed. Now, I did. Yes, not 100%. I was able to get, a couple of ounces here, a couple of ounces there, enough to do maybe a third or a quarter of the nursing, and then to supplement with the bottle, which it was some of the researchers and some of the La Leche people and other people would say, oh, there'll be nipple confusion. You can't do bottle and breast. No problem. My kids were like, wherever, I'll take it.
And that was my same experience. I never had breast surgery, although I actually had an open breast biopsy when I was pregnant with my second child, but that's a whole nother story.
Really?
But I had no trouble nursing except for my crazy work schedule. So, and my son also was little bit premature and he needed to be fed every 2 hours. So I definitely did the bottle and breastfeeding.
And it works.
No such thing as nipple confusion. He didn't care where his food was coming from. And at 6'1", he still doesn't care where his food is coming.
It doesn't work for everybody, but it can work if you know, the baby is receptive to it.
Yeah, my babies were actually my first child was. My second child was pretty insistent on breastfeeding.
Really?
Yes.
That personality came through, huh?
And she made it very clear from day one, she gets what she wants. So tell me, what were the after effects? How long did it take you to recuperate?
So it was honestly, I don't remember 100% because I was 16, but I do remember I got to get the elevator key at school.
Ooh, I had that once. That was awesome.
That's the best part. That was the only good part about doing it at 16. I remember being wrapped up. You know, they put the ACE bandages around you and you have the tubes coming out with blood. And it was short. In fact, this young woman I was with who was considering it, she was told she could do it over winter vacation. From college and have the recuperation. I think it was just a few weeks and then be up and around.
That's a thing now with all of these surgeries in teenagers.
Yeah.
Surgeons are telling them, just pick your school vacation and we will accommodate. And I had major spinal surgery the day after my freshman year in college, which was hardly elective, but went back to school as scheduled in a body cast. And that's what you do when you're a teenager. And you don't know better.
You bounce back.
You bounce back a lot more quickly.
And I will tell you, now I'm different than many people, whereas I didn't keep it a secret. I was in high school. It was the middle of high school. You know, I was a sophomore and I just told everybody. I decided, look, I'm going to look different. I see this as a relief. I'm just going to tell people in my hospital room. My boyfriend came over with a giant cake with 2 boobs on it, stuck it on the television and said, "Hey, it's the boob tube." And it was fine. I didn't care. And everybody kind of fed off of that positive energy.
And did Sally feel the same way? Did she tell people or was she more private about it?
She was more private about it.
And did she have it between, I guess she was in college already, so on summer vacation?
I think she did it, I can't remember. She did it after high school. So it was much more private. And
that's what a lot of parents and children who are having these surgeries are deciding to do is in the summer between high school and college, because then you go off to college and you have a whole new group of friends and nobody knows anything. And although actually maybe now that's a little different with Facebook. So people see what you look like or what you used to look like. I think
people care less these days about, I hope people care less. I don't know if that's really true. That might just me wishing that were so.
I think most of the girls I've talked to who are in the process of trying to decide this are very self-conscious, very sensitive, very aware. I've heard way too many bullying stories, way too many stories of being judged, way too many stories of these girls being hit on by older men.
It's crazy.
Who think they're, much older.
Well, because you look older.
Yeah. And, they should ask. One of the things I even, say to young men who are going off to college once they turn 18 is just, if you're going to hook up with somebody, ask to see their driver's license first. And if they don't have one, that's a red flag.
Yeah, thank you. That's true.
Because now even, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds who might be hooking up with 16-year-olds could be
bad news.
Registered as sex offenders, without really knowing that there was an issue.
No, that's a really good, here we're getting off track again, but that's a really good point.
Us?
What? How does that
We
sound?
did that?
But see, we give all these good little nuggets of information to people.
Well, and the fact is, it's all related. The fact is there are all these issues. What's interesting about girls who choose to have breast enhancement or breast augmentation is what I sometimes worry about is there becomes this focus on their smaller breasts or less than optimal breasts in their mind, being the reason for any unhappiness in their lives. And they get this sort of fantasy thinking about, well, if I just, and this isn't just teenagers, this is adult women as well. If I just had bigger breasts, everything in my life would be different. And I would have a better boyfriend or a better job or a better career or, you know, more fun or
this is, you bring up a really good point. I was going to talk about this before. The reason I had this surgery was probably not for a good reason because of bullying in the beginning, but I'm glad I made the decision. And had I maybe thought about it more as an older person or been counseled a little bit more about it back then as my 16-year-old self, I would have come to the same decision, but I probably would have done it for other reasons. And the reasons would have been because I wanted it for me. And because not for anybody else, not for the way other people would see me, but for the way I see myself and the way I feel. And, you know, how I look in the mirror or look down at myself or just feel in my own space and in my own shoes. And that's really how you have to come to that decision. You know, you can't do it because your boyfriend says or,
I think breast reduction surgery is different from many of the other cosmetic elective procedures in that there are medical consequences of having breasts that are way too large for your frame.
Yeah, your back hurts.
Back pain, and being that stooped posture, which would have been worse if you also had any kind of scoliosis to a certain degree or any other kind of orthopedic problems, or it could have led to other orthopedic problems. So in many insurance companies actually cover breast reduction surgery.
They do, based on a percentage of your, like how your size and your weight. There's some calculation
formula.
They do. Yeah, there's some formula.
And of course, insurance companies vary tremendously in what they cover, and insurance policies, even within the same company, may vary. But you know, that's I think one of the things people are surprised to find out with other cosmetic surgeries is that they are not generally covered by insurance. And of course,
I was going to say sometimes, you know, I know a lot of kids who had a lot of breathing issues or deviated septums or other problems with their nose. And while they were in there, you know, they could have a little tweak, a little this, a little that. And that's great, you know, because then the anesthesia cost is covered and the doctor's time is covered and you just have to pay.
And very often what they do is they give you a separate bill for each part of that. So, and I think those are factors that weigh into a parent's decision. You know, with certain procedures, obviously, with rhinoplasty or nose jobs, you know, there are certain ages that doctors recommend because we want to wait till the boy or girl has achieved their full growth. So usually in girls, that's 15 to 16. Boys, it's usually a little bit older.
Oh, interesting.
With breast reduction surgery, I haven't seen any age limitations. And I've heard of these surgeries being, you know, in girls who are 6, 7, 8, and 9, as well as teenagers, because they're just, their breasts are very large. And many times girls will elect to have these kind of surgeries, either a breast reduction or breast enhancement, because their breasts are very different sizes. Yeah, so that's
I know actually somebody who did that. And speaking of the nose jobs, a lot of times, I have a fuzzy, a lot of times, you know, with the doctor's cost, because it can be expensive to have the procedures. A young woman I know was concerned about the cost, and she was talking to the doctor about it, and she had some flexibility in her time when she could do it. And the doctor offered her an option, a discounted option, if she was willing to be on call for when somebody canceled.
Oh my goodness.
Right? Isn't that
that's awesome. I never heard of that.
Right. And so that's what she did. And she was able to save like several $1,000s.
That's sort of like the Hotels Tonight app with hotel rooms, that if you wait till the last minute, you can get a big discount on your hotel room.
She had all of her preliminary stuff done and everything. And she was sort of ready between this date and this date, that when people cancel because of illness or they change their mind, whatever. So
Right. Or, planes being rescheduled, car problems, all
Right.
sorts of things. I never heard of that. That is really very clever. And that brings up the point that, with elective surgery and cosmetic surgery, it's kind of like anything else. The price is often very negotiable.
Right.
And that's worth having a conversation with. And I think people are very uncomfortable about that. One of the things that staggers me is how much money people pay for cosmetic surgery. And I don't have that statistic handy, but it'd be really kind of interesting. And that's completely out of pocket. And those numbers are increasing. And yet they have a problem paying $40 for a copay for a visit to the pediatrician.
I know.
So that kind of irks me a little bit when we're talking about those kinds of things.
I guess if you're comparing it to their copay, yes. But I do, I'm not afraid of saying it's okay to do a little bit if it makes you feel better. I think that there's a slippery slope.
Well, and it's okay to do it if you have the money.
If you have the money, right.
For people who are making a choice between cosmetic surgery or taking their child to the pediatrician, that's, where we have, issues.
So I went to my plastic surgeon to have an injectable. And he was telling me that the age that people are beginning the injectables is so much younger now. I mean, in their 20s, they're starting so that they can avoid getting wrinkles in the future, which that surprised me.
Yeah. And years ago, and years ago, I won't tell you how many years ago, I was on the Oprah show talking about Botox and fillers and this big controversy that it was being done by women in their 30s. And my big insightful comment was, what is she going to do when she's 40?
Right.
And I remember I was at the time, I think I was about 40. And I remember they had a couple of patients who had done this. And I remember secretly thinking, well, I look younger than they do. and have not had work and have not had work done. I think the way I always felt is not that I'm opposed to it. And of course, as with everything, I believe in people having their choice to do what works for them, for their families, and of course their pocketbooks.
Right.
But in my case, I had so many non-elective surgeries that I always felt there would be no way I would voluntarily, have surgery that wasn't absolutely essential. Although I finally did have a little teeny tweak. I had a skin tag that was growing right in the corner of my eye. And it was really irritating, and it was just, I always constantly felt like there was something in my eye, but mostly, I had it removed because it was cosmetically horrible.
No, that's not even.
And I couldn't put my eye makeup.
No, that's mandatory, I think.
But at the same time, I was really stressed out about it. The idea of I couldn't get beyond the idea that she was going to inject anesthetic, a needle into my eyelid.
I know.
And just the thought of that was awful. And I have to say it was as awful as I imagined. Once that was done, the procedure was not awful.
Okay, I've had something taken off my eye and it wasn't cosmetic. It was a chalazion. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yes.
If for anybody who doesn't know what that is, you don't want to know what it is. It's like this big, it looks like a giant whitehead or whatever. And it just, you can't.
But on the eyelid.
On the lid.
Yeah, and not on the eye.
Oh my God. They had to inject. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go there. Put me out if you're going to do it again. That's all
I actually, #advantages of being a doctor. I admit I pre-medicated myself.
Yeah, I would have. Make it legal.
I had asked her, I said, should I be taking something beforehand? And she said, well, if you want to take a Valium 30 minutes beforehand, that would make my job a lot easier. And that was my first time ever having Valium also.
But see, there's other reasons to have things removed. I think there was a girl I knew when I was growing up who had a big mole on her face. And, and she, was always walking around with her hair kind of covering. And she had it, I saw her years later, she had it removed. And, different way she stood, different different posture, everything. It just made a difference. So
we even see that with kids who have who have bad teeth, who have their teeth corrected.
Right.
All of a sudden,
that's
they get their braces off and they're smiling away.
So it's like I said, there is like a slippery slope where you start doing this and you do this and you do this, and you have to not continue down that path, nip and tuck, you've seen it, but a little bit, if it makes you feel better, I think it's okay. And you have to remember that, I think, for your children, that don't put your own opinions on them, let them make their own choices. So I've talked to many mothers and mostly mothers, about their daughters who are considering one thing or another. One who was even considering a reconstruction of her labia, because
it's actually much more common than you would think.
Right.
One side was bigger than the other.
Right. And the daughter didn't want it. And
but the mother was considering this, and the daughter didn't.
Really concerned.
Oh my goodness.
The daughter said no, and so said to the mother, "You got to back off."
I even felt strongly about that with respect to getting your ears pierced. I didn't have my ears pierced till I was 18 years old because I felt like I should be an adult before I make this decision. And I felt the same way with respect to having a daughter. And, obviously there are lots of parents who choose to have their daughter's ears pierced shortly after birth, when they're just weeks old.
Right.
And, in many cases that's a cultural thing, but I just felt like I wouldn't want to make that choice for my daughter. I would want her to make that choice on her own if and when she felt it was a choice she wanted to make.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a very small thing. I do think parents often impose their views on their kids.
Right.
So especially with this surgery for pinning back floppy ears. Many times kids grow into their ears. Obviously, many times they don't. But I think often that's coming from the parents. So that, of course, is the first rule, according to the American Association of Plastic Surgeons, is that this should be the child's decision, and the child should be leading that decision. Obviously, if the child's under 18, the parents have to give final approval and consent and payment. So that's also a huge issue. So the parent can say no at any time. I was very surprised, though, to find out that breast reduction surgery or gynecomastia surgery in males was actually more common than in females.
Right.
And then, of course, now with obesity rates increasing among girls and boys, but that's a huge factor.
So this is a question.
But many times it's also genetic.
Well, is it also maybe because of the hormones that are in all the food?
Yeah, I don't want to commit to that. There are people who think that, and there's a whole huge body of literature on environmental estrogens and what are called estrogen disruptors.
Right.
But there are a certain percentage of boys who are just born that way.
Yeah.
And they're not chubby, and that's just how they look, and it's very embarrassing, and it's actual breast tissue. And so it's very embarrassing for these boys when they're changing in the locker rooms, if they're competing in sports like swimming, or topless sports, or sports like soccer, where a lot of the guys take their shirts off, or they play shirts versus skins, so that's a real issue for these boys. And then, many other things that teenagers are interested in having cosmetic surgery for. What concerns me tremendously is the influence that I see that celebrities' choices are having on lots of teenagers. So, when Kylie Jenner got fillers when she was 17, of course, this is a whole big controversy at that time. I don't know why any of us should get to weigh in on what Kylie Jenner decides to do, except that she probably made it a public issue.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, all these teenage girls want to do, what she did.
Right.
Certainly there's a long history of girls who want to be models or who want to be in beauty pageants.
So I think this is something that's really important to teach our kids, is that you have to not compare yourself to what's on television, to what the celebrities are doing. And even if you look at the television shows and the characters who are being portrayed as high school students, they're not high school students. If you look at the show Glee, what were they, 29 years old? 29 years old, and they're playing high school students. And
well, I'll tell you, I saw the revival of Grease on Broadway several years ago, and I scored great tickets, second row, right in the center. And it ruined the show for me
Yeah.
because I was actually so close that I could tell that these actors were in their late 20s.
Right.
And that just, there was nothing that they could do with all of their great talent as actors to convince me that they were high school students.
It's not okay. I mean, if you actually look at, I remember just in 8th grade going to graduation, and you know how they line everybody up by their height in graduation, and there's the little boy who's the shortest in the class, and the girl who's here, and then there's a boy who's the tallest in the class, and you know, by senior year they start to kind of catch up, but these kids, even freshman year, they're still there, and sophomore year they're still. That's not, high school isn't these football players and this and this. And it's just.
Well, I was once in a department store in the toy section, and I saw this little girl who, she really couldn't have been more than 3.5. And she was in the cart, and she wanted a Barbie, you know, at 3.5. She wanted a Barbie. So her mother just handed her a Barbie off the shelf, and she looks at the Barbie and she threw it out of the cart, and she said, "That's no fair. Barbie has breasts and I don't." I was like shocked. And I thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. The mother was embarrassed. I thought it was hysterical, but I think it also was this huge social commentary.
Right.
You know, that here's this 3.5. Okay, maybe she was 4. Maybe she was a tiny 4. But here was this little girl who was upset, like angry, that Barbie had breasts and she didn't, because she's thinking Barbie is her age, you know, which is interesting. When I was dying, I was wishing the mother would have said, you know, "I promise you, honey, when you're as old as Barbie, you will have breasts." You know, so these are all issues. The thing that I am very excited about from people shouldn't judge themselves by other people and by photoshopped images is how awesome is it that CVS announced that they won't be photoshopping any images of their models in advertising anymore. Did you hear about that?
It's about time.
Yeah. So I think that is a very huge step.
That will help. And the less that they have these women as, I just read an article about the tech industry and how they have what are they called when the models are, you know, in the booths, you know, trying to show all the computer stuff.
Product ambassadors.
Booth babes, I think.
Oh, really? I never heard that term.
There's a name for them. And they are wearing, you know, nothing. Stickers. And these poor women who are actually in industry are trying to be taken seriously. And this is what's selling the product. And young women who are looking at this is what they're trying to, you know, compete with, and it's not realistic. So I'm glad to hear CVS is doing that.
CVS.
Oh, CVS is
CVS, the drugstore.
Oh, good. But
the same drugstore that was the first drugstore chain a few years ago to stop selling cigarettes.
Hooray for them.
Very proud of them.
Hooray for them. Do they have people in their ads? I'm just trying to think. I don't know.
I guess.
Yeah.
Or
good.
Maybe that makes it easy if they don't not Photoshop them in there.
But no, you know what? Good. It's a start. That's
a huge start.
And I love these models and actresses who show themselves without makeup and show themselves. Yeah. So
like me.
You're gorgeous.
Minimal makeup. You know, and I think that's, you know, clearly the message we need to be sending to our daughters and girls around the world, is that your true beauty is your self-esteem, your confidence. It comes from inside you. The problem is when we say those things to girls, they translate that into, "You don't think I'm pretty."
I know.
You know, and that's the thing, you know, the real fine line that we have to walk
so true.
As a parent is you're beautiful, but more importantly, you are intelligent, you're kind, you're compassionate, you're funny, you're awesome. You know, and I think that, you know, that's our challenge as women of a certain age.
Oh, yes.
Now that we have entered the realm of wise women. So that's the thing. We're not aged. We're not old. We're wise.
We are very wise, but you know, we do have to walk a fine line here, because we have to accept them how they are. But if they do want to change something, we have to accept that too, but guide them.
If it's reasonable.
Reasonable.
We don't have to if we're the parents.
No, that's true.
So, and if we're paying for it. So we have some, we still have some.
We do.
Leverage
we have say
in that.
But make sure we talk. And that's the most important thing, is talk to them and find out where it's coming from.
Yeah, I actually was reading one article where a surgeon said he often recommends psychosurgery first. And that's, talking with a counselor and figuring out what the issues are. And of course, the surgeons also have a real role in this.
Yeah.
Because I think they have a responsibility sometimes to say, I could do a tweak and a nip and a tuck, but you really probably don't need this. Right. And I don't know many cosmetic surgeons who say that.
Right.
And that's kind of unfortunate. So we have to do the work before then. But, you're saying it as parents, we have say. I think the other issue is that we have sway.
Oh, that's good.
And so I think we can listen and we can hear the concerns. And of course, I think the most important thing as a parent is letting your children know that you're open to hearing those concerns, whatever they are, whether it's disproportionate size labia, or another concern that was, of course, made famous by Friends, which is, this issue of many people having a third nipple.
Yeah.
And that was a great television show it was kind of a farce, and it was making fun of the character who had this, and it was making, and they were bullying him and they were really making fun of him. But I think most people didn't know that this is a real thing that people have. And that is also a commonly performed cosmetic surgery, as is removing any moles.
Right.
Either because they're unsightly or they're in an awkward position. Many times if people have or especially men, if they have a mole on their neck somewhere, it's right where they have to do their tie or their collar hits, or women who have moles on their back right at their bra strap.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if people had horrible acne and they want to have the scars, removed.
And that is one of the top cosmetic procedures for teenagers.
Right.
Dermabrasion and laser procedures for removing acne scars.
But again, I think because we do kind of hold the purse strings and also because
and these things are expensive.
These are expensive, but it also gives us, and we always as parents need to look for these opportunities. It gives us the chance to have discussions with our kids. They got to talk to us. So we can look at this and say, okay, you know what? I'm listening. I want to know more about it and why you want to do this and what's going on. And they need to talk to you because, you're not going to do it unless you know what's behind it.
Well, and the answer may be very illuminating. It may be that they're being bullied in school. It may be that somebody is making fun of them. It may be that they didn't know that this may change over time, or that this is normal or not normal. And the parents may not know. And I think,
or they may not know it's genetic.
Right.
And that you're not alone. You know what? I had this, your grandmother had this, and I get it. I understand. And here's how I handled it. And this is, there's ways to open up that line of communication.
Well, this has been great. And this has been a great way to open up the lines of communication. We do have to wrap up, unfortunately, but I have to ask you a couple of questions that I ask everybody.
Yeah.
Although I asked you my favorite one at the beginning.
I love that
by
one.
Far, the one about your most interesting experience in the ladies' room. One of these days, I'll write a book about all the interesting experiences I've had in ladies' rooms. But if you could give one piece of health advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
Health advice to my 21-year-old self: stay out of the sun so much.
Or use sunscreen.
Well, yeah, that's been overdone, of course. I'm still skeptical of sunscreen.
Well, actually, speaking of ladies' rooms, years and years ago, I was in Australia, and they did a great job of having these public health announcement posters on the inside door of the stalls. And some of them were about reporting domestic violence, and some of them were about sexual abuse. And this was a long time ago.
Right.
But they had this one great campaign that I was seeing all across Australia, which was slip, slap, slop. Slip on a shirt, slap on a hat, slop on some sunscreen. And of course, in Australia, they have a huge incidence of skin cancer, including they drive on they're on the opposite side of the road, and on the one arm, on the driver's window side,
that's where
they
get
have
it.
a much higher incidence of skin cancer than on the other arm. So, but these things are all really important. Of course, with the advent of slip, slap, slop, and more people using sunscreen, now we have an issue with people having really low vitamin D levels. So there's always
upside and a downside. Yep.
Yeah. All right. And what's the most important health issue that you think is facing American women today?
Well, just breast cancer. I mean, I see it with women of our age. Mm-hmm. I know too many in my inner circle who are either going through it, have gone through it, or
I know you recently lost your best friend.
I did.
With breast cancer.
So,
and that you never get over. We actually had one of our previous guests, Fitfluencer Laura DeAngelis, who has not had breast cancer herself, but has become a breast cancer warrior for awareness and prevention because in part her mother had breast cancer, but did really well, but she lost her best friend at 42 years old.
Oh,
so
it's just horrible.
It's horrible. It really is horrible. And the good news is we are making progress with the advent of increased awareness and with the availability of the Affordable Care Act, making mammograms affordable and available
to
women who need that access to care. Mm-hmm. But we still lose 40,000 women a year to breast cancer.
By the way, if you are considering a breast reduction, and
I'm not, by the way, I don't have enough to spare.
Well, I was speaking to the greater you, but you are great. But the doctors will ask you to be screened if it's in your genes, the BRCA gene or anything in your family before having the breast reduction, just to make sure.
That is great. And that certainly didn't happen when you were 16.
No.
Yeah. So that's great. Anyway, and then the final question that I have for you before I let you go, and I know you're going to have a great answer. What's the number one thing you want men to know about women's health?
Oh boy. Well, of course.
Only one. You don't get to give me 753.
Seriously? That they don't own our bodies. Can I say that?
Absolutely.
Ours, and not theirs.
We're in the ladies' room. You can say anything you want to say.
Yeah, that's what I want them to know. I guess that's not really women's health, but it is.
Absolutely women's health. That's the crux of women's health. That's the essence of our being. And that's in terms of, I don't know if you're referring to reproductive rights issues or if you're referring to Me Too issues or Time's Up issues or hashtag hands off.
Hands off, baby.
Or everything in between.
It's respect. It's really consent.
It's consent.
Yeah, it's consent.
And that's, one of the things that I have told women. I've heard a lot of comments from men about, oh, well, how am I going to know now if it's okay? And I said, it's very easy. If you are unsure about anything, ask her.
Right.
And that's a great point to leave you. Betsy, thank you. As always, you are fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. One of my favorite people, and now one of the favorite people of all of our listeners.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Donnica. The feeling is mutual.
Take care. Thanks again.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donnica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donnica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.